You know, I'm going to give you a history lesson.
We got some dumbass motherfuckers floating around this country.
Stop laughing! And when I do, start.
Also, y'all did some nasty-ass jokes on my ass, too.
Funny jokes and unfunny jokes come out of the same birth.
You f***ing guys are unbelievable.
Why are you laughing?
Evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Why You Laughing, a History of Comedy podcast. And today, I am pleased to introduce to you the hit sitcom Married with Children. In my opinion, an underrated classic, and I apologize for my voice today. I'm a little under the weather, but the show must go on. That's how dedicated I am to educating you people on the history of comedy. And this is no exception because, if you think of the 90s, you definitely think of Seinfeld and Friends, obviously, as far as sitcoms go. Roseanne, definitely recognized. Frasier won all the awards and everything. I feel like Married with Children doesn't get the respect it deserves for kind of creating a segment of sitcom that was ripped off a lot afterwards. But they really were the first of their kind in a lot of ways. And were definitely influenced by sitcoms that came before it. But they had a style and a brand of humor that was often duplicated afterwards. But before that was pretty revolutionary. And the ultimate curse, I think, of Married with Children, as it is for most sitcoms, is lasting too long. Because a lot of people criticize the later seasons of the program, say it jumped the shark and everything, which, I don't know, might be why it doesn't have the same life that the Seinfeld and Friends have in syndication. Could be because of the raunchy nature of the humor as well. But we will get into all of that today as far as Married with Children goes. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. If you have suggestions, things I missed on this episode, anything like that, leave them in the comments. I read a lot of the comments. Sometimes I respond and interact with you people. So get in those comments and let us know your thoughts. You do that on YouTube, please. Or I guess wherever you get podcasts. But particularly YouTube, because it helps the algorithm. And the best way to find all of our links for this program is blindmike.net. It's where you get the links for Why You Laughing on all platforms, as well as the Blind Mike Project and Who Are These Socials, the other podcasts that I'm a host of. And you can go to our Patreon or YouTube and become a member if you want bonus content and early access to episodes. So consider supporting the show that way. We appreciate you guys. We haven't done a ton of TV shows, and we haven't done one in a while. And I thought Married with Children would be a good place to start looking into. Because like I said, I don't know that it gets the respect of a lot of the other shows that were on at that time when it did have so much influence. It's the longest, I believe, well, not anymore. I think at the time, it was the longest running show to have never been nominated for an Emmy. Another amazing show that has taken that mantle from them is Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which I think does have a lot of parallels to Married with Children. Very, very, very different plotline premises. But the idea that it's basically a 22-minute roast of all the characters. There's no learn. It is just unredeemable characters ripping on each other. And we will get into how some people, I think, mischaracterize this show as, there are aspects that you could probably say are misogynist, but I think mischaracterize the humor as being misogynist. Because if you look at the four main characters, they're all the idiots. Like every show has the punching bag, the Cliff Clavin, if you will, where it's like the guy that gets all the dumb jokes, everything goes wrong. That's all four main characters in this show. Like there are no redeemable qualities, and that's something Always Sunny did very well also. Seinfeld gets that rap. Like the finale is, they're all terrible people, so they go to jail. I think that's a misnomer of sorts for Seinfeld, because particularly in the early seasons, I don't know what changed in the last couple, but in the early seasons of Seinfeld, they're not horrible monsters. They're people with relatable hang-ups that are trying to be the best possible version of themselves, but can't overcome these little idiosyncrasies that they have. they're not like these bad people that they I guess, became by the end. Married with Children, it is wall to wall, them all kind of being degenerate shitheads. So let's get into it. The creation of Married with Children.
We saw Roseanne Barr.
This is Michael Moy, by the way, co-creator.
Domestic goddess comedy routine, which is very, very funny. Very, very unique. And maybe a couple weeks earlier, we're big fans of Sam Kinison. And we just saw Sam Kinison do, one of his, nutty screaming, I guess at the time people would say anti-woman bits. And I don't know which one of us it was. But the idea was, wouldn't it be funny if that character was married to that character? That, in a nutshell, is how I remember basically the conception of Married with Children.
Yeah, so that is a very different show, by the way. You totally see how that's the foundation of it. Mm-hmm. But Roseanne and Sam Kinison, I imagine, would play completely different characters than what Peg and Al Bundy came to be. In fact, in Katie Seagal's interpretation of the character, she specifically said she wanted it to be different. Peg Bundy was written as like a couch potato, which Roseanne would have played into that very well. Peg Bundy saw her more as a woman who was trying to be sexy, like she kind of a parody of like the 60s housewife that was on television, but someone who was so much more sexualized in a way that you didn't see on TV. And that, as Roseanne, just wouldn't have worked. I think it would have repulsed people, quite frankly. But
I mean, in the intro of the show, it shows her mixing a salad. She drops her cigarette in it. Instead of grabbing it, she just continues mixing the salad.
Like that's Roseanne. Yeah. So those are the elements of Roseanne. And as a side note, shout out to Roseanne for taking a gamble, because this is a woman that had like 10 minutes of stand-up material. She just popped on the Tonight Show. And the reason she turned down Married with Children is she basically wanted control, which she got in the show Roseanne. It was named after, she ended up, we talked about it in the Roseanne episode, but she ended up overtaking the writer's room and basically kicking everyone out of there. So, shout out to her for having that. It's a gamble. It easily could have not worked. But to turn down network sitcom at that time is pretty ballsy. However, I should note that it is not like turning down sitcom from Fox even 10 years later, after Married with Children was established. Because in 1986, 87, when the show was being created, Fox didn't exist. In fact, Married with Children was the first program to air on Fox. So, and it wasn't in, I think you'll hear it in a couple of these clips, I think it was in like 70% of households. Like Ed O'Neill said when he told people he was on a show for a season and a half, they were like, oh, where do I find it? Like they had no idea it existed. Which is pretty crazy to think about, especially with what Fox is now. But forever it was CBS, ABC, and NBC. And Fox had this vision of saying like, hey, all these shows, all these networks are doing the same shows essentially. And you have the same, when it comes to sitcoms, you have The Cosby Show, Family Ties, shows that kind of the Wonder Years, like these shows that are what the American family should be, like in an ideal world. I guess you could say like All in the Family wasn't that really. The Honeymooners wasn't necessarily that, but it's still that it targeted, I think, a more wholesome audience. Whereas Fox said, we talked about this a lot with Martin Lawrence too, when like Martin was such a different sitcom than was on any other network, because Fox said, let's get the degenerates. Like these people exist, the people that the other networks are deeming, too lowbrow or whatever. Like let's capitalize on that. Let's try to get a younger audience. Let's try to get people that laugh at stuff that the other networks say you're not supposed to laugh at. And that was very smart. It only took about 10, 15 years for Fox to just be like the other three networks. But early on, they were rebels in that way.
Next, we have this is them talking about Fox.
Okay, cool. Let's hear a little more about it.
And so when I got Married with Children, it was like, yeah, really exciting. And I was like, oh, but we're not really on a network. It was kind of like a letdown, No one knew what this Fox network was. It was only in like 80% of American households. Yeah. And some of those that it was on, it was like way up on the cable station. And, you'd see it in the show because we used to poke fun of it ourselves. The writers would anyway, about, trying to get the rabbit ears up to watch Fox and that whole thing. Yeah. Right. And so, but again, I was pretty young, so I don't think I really understood the gravity of the whole thing and sort of like the network really riding on Us, the Tracy Ullman Show, and 21 Jump Street. That was the three sort of shows that premiered it on those nights, and they played them like back to back, like 3 times because they had nothing else to play. But at the same time, we got all the attention of the network, and they had, because they had a lot riding on us, they really tried to pour everything that they could scrounge up.
That's David Faustino, who played Bud Bundy, and yeah, there are like actually very funny jokes about like them having to get into assume the positions for the antennas to pick up if they wanted to watch something on Fox. And so even like NBC was very good about that over the years as well. I remember like with 30 Rock, or even back like with Carson, like they were good at busting their own balls. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of jokes within Married with Children that maybe the general audience didn't even get. But like they would poke fun at themselves a lot in those early days, which I think is very smart. But like David Faustino said there, another advantage that they had, like if that show's on NBC, it's one of 8,000 shows that they have to pick from. And if it doesn't pop in the first 6 episodes, see you later. They don't need it. Right. Not to be fair to NBC, like they gave Seinfeld a chance and other shows like that. But they didn't have to, certainly. Whereas Fox kind of had to. Like Fox had a limited time, even like when they're casting the show, it was weeks before the show made it, the network was going to launch. So like they kind of had to cater to what Married with Children wanted in those early days, which resulted in it being able to grow some legs.
Next we have Ed O'Neill talking about Al Bundy.
Yeah, so this is the toughest part of their casting. Obviously, once Kinison and Roseanne turned it down. And they said, like, it's funny to think now because Kinison's representation basically said, well, Sam's going to be a movie star. And it's funny now where it's like, that doesn't even really, like, you would die to get on TV now as an actor. But at the time, TV was thought of as nothing. Like, it's not what the goal was. Certainly not a television show on a network that wasn't broadcast everywhere. So they had a hard time finding Al Bundy. And Ed O'Neill explains that process here.
And I saw the guy as my uncle, one of my uncles.
Al Bundy, you're saying?
Yeah, he was like, and the guy was a judge, but he reminded me of this guy. And what I mean is, I guess apparently most of the guys that read for it were doing it like Jackie Gleason in The Honeymooners, yelling and mad. Mm-hmm. Well, my uncle was like resigned. Life was going to be bad.
Resigned. I love it.
So, we'd be like, he'd get home from work and he'd come in the house and my aunt, his wife, would say, Joe, I ran over the dog in the driveway. Today's dead. And Joe would say, what's for dinner? So it was sort of like that, right? That's how I read it. And they had not heard that tact.
Interpretation.
No, they had not heard that. And they went, well, that's kind of funny.
It is very good. And Ed O'Neill was like a dramatic actor before that, so didn't really have a long standing in comedy. Ed O'Neill's got a very interesting life. I recommend going to check out his. He was on WTF with Marin somewhat recently. And a very interesting guy. Made training camp with the Steelers. like made it to the NFL, which is why that the high school football star thing feels real enough, because he legitimately was. But Ed O'Neill, very interesting guy, and just worked in steel mills in Youngstown, Ohio, and had kind of a nonchalance when it comes to being in Hollywood, which is not something you saw particularly at that time. So his approach to it being subtle like that was very smart, because I see more in that character. There's obviously parallels to the Honeymooners, particularly with the dynamic between Peg and Al, where it's like they are roasting each other. So I see why actors would go in and play it as Gleason very big. I've always seen Al Bundy more like influenced by Carol O'Connor as Archie Bunker, where there are moments where Archie Bunker would be yelling and very animated, but a lot of it was just very late, like, oh, geez, Edith, like very laid back and subtle. And I think that's true of Al Bundy too, where there's moments where Al Bundy is a very cartoonish guy, but a lot of his best reactions are much more aloof, which I think was so important to that character.
Next, we have him talking about almost getting fired.
Yeah, this is very interesting because, like I said, they didn't have it was crunch time, and the network didn't really want Ed O'Neill, but it just worked out for him.
That Diller wanted Katie, but he didn't want me.
Mm-hmm.
Diller was Murdoch's right-hand guy.
Yeah.
And he just thought that they could do better, because they never heard of me.
Mm-hmm.
I was a dramatic actor as far as they were concerned.
Yes.
From New York and unknown. So they were putting a lot of money in this show, and they said, this guy, who is he?
Mm-hmm.
He's not a comedian. He's not funny. He's not. So they were desperate because they were a week away from shooting. So they said, we really want him. And Murdoch said, Diller said, do what you want, and left and went back to Fox. And so they started to make arrangements to cast me. And then apparently he called and said, did you get rid of O'Neill? And they said, no, you told us we could do what we want. He said, I didn't mean it. So as the story goes, he said, well, it's bought for 12. It's now 1.
One episode?
We're paying for the pilot. If this thing doesn't kick off, this will never see the light of day. Whoa. If you hire this guy.
And you just found that out a month ago?
Yeah. And they didn't tell me. And so we shot the pilot under those pressures for everybody else.
Jeez.
Yeah, so Richard Gurman, who's a producer of the show, and I kind of took over in the later years of the program, wrote a book a few years ago. And Ed O'Neill said he didn't know about that moment until that book came out, where he's reading Richard Gurman's book. He's like, I didn't know they almost fired me. He's like I guess he knew that Barry Diller at the network didn't necessarily like him. And Ed O'Neill said that years later, when Ed was on Modern Family, he saw him at some party or event, and Barry Diller goes, I made a mistake, or I almost made a mistake with you. And Ed O'Neill goes, we all make them. He's very cool about it. Like, Ed O'Neill has a cool presence to him. And by the way, one of the greatest actors in television history. So, or it's certainly one of the best resumes. But the other casting came together fairly easily, although they recast the kids in the original pilot. It was not David Faustino and Christina Applegate. It was 2 other actors, and it just wasn't working. So they brought in new kids, much like Married with Children. Much like All in the Family, by the way. Same deal. But let's continue.
Yeah, we have Christina Applegate.
Yeah, so this is another example of she was a dramatic actor. And by the way, as you listen to this clip, I like the idea of a 15-year-old and her stage mom poo-pooing the idea of a comedy. But Christina Applegate wasn't necessarily on board at first.
I was 15, and I auditioned.
Now, when you
for
read
that
the script, did you think this is so right? It's wrong, or it's wrong, it's right?
It's funny. I did not want to do the show. I thought it was, at that time, I was on a drama series, and I thought it was disgusting, and I wouldn't even audition for it. And then they went ahead and shot a pilot with 2 other kids, and it just didn't, for whatever reason, the chemistry just didn't work. And they came back to me and said, will you please come in? And I was like, no. And they sent me the pilot, and my mom and I did not want to like it. And we turned it on, and we were stifling laughing. So I thought, I'll go in. But I'd never done comedy before.
And ultimately, a smart decision, obviously, because Christina Applegate's great. Like Christina Applegate in Anchorman is hilarious. Like she's very good in comedies. I like the idea of a stage mom who pushes their child into acting, being like, "Oh no, comedy's beneath you." But
no television series.
But it did, like, I do imagine. And, I don't know the original script for the pilot, but I can understand why, if you look at Married with Children, why maybe a young woman would be like, oh, I'm a little hesitant. Like, legitimately, Kelly Bundy was 16 on this show and would walk in with a low-cut top, and men would go, whoa! People would go nuts. It's wild to look back on now. It is like, I remember I was probably 9 years old or something like that. And I remember adult men having a conversation in front of me about Britney Spears having a countdown clock where they're like, oh, when she's 18, as if they have some chance at that point. But like, it was a different time as far as that goes. By that, I mean sexualizing youths.
I think the Olsen twins was the last time.
The Olsen twins was another one. Yeah. Which is weird because they were never, they were like babies.
No kidding.
But I do get why a young girl might be hesitant about taking that role. But like I said, it was all stereotypes. Like Bud Bundy was the worst of male insecurities. You know what I mean? Like he was a dork, basically. And she was a whore. And they were playing into these stereotypes that weren't represented on television in other instances. And you hear the cast say a lot of stuff like, I think we have Katie Seagal talking about it as well. But like, it's hard, I think, for a lot of actors. Glenn Howerton has talked a lot about this with him playing Dennis Reynolds. Obviously, like Carol O'Connor and roles like that. I think it's very difficult for actors to take on a role that represent something to people that it isn't necessarily. Like obviously, Married with Children is satire. It's a joke. It's meant to be funny, but it is like they're parodying people that exist. So it's actually pretty arrogant for like Norman Lear to be upset that there are people in the country that identified with Archie Bunker. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, well, you're mocking a human being that exists out there and saying they're dumb. So for that to then be like, why didn't they get that I'm joking? It's like, well, as you said, they're stupid people. And I do have to say, listening to, I didn't know much about Michael Moy. I believe it's Michael Moy. Ed O'Neill said Michael Moye. I don't know. Michael Moy and Ron Levitt, like listening to interviews with them and stuff, they seem to not give a fuck. And that was kind of refreshing. Like, I don't know a ton about them, but it was refreshing to hear guys be like, yeah, you know, people misinterpret it, whatever. Like, we wrote the show the way we wanted, and they don't feel guilty about it or anything. So that is kind of nice in today's day and age, I suppose.
Next, we have him talking about network testing.
Yeah, so Michael Moy again, and this is what I talked about with like it being crunch time. These guys could kind of do what they wanted. That's a nice place to negotiate from. Like I've heard Louis C.K. talk about this, where he didn't want to do a television show, really. And so when FX came and offered him a television show, Louis was like, well, I do have this one idea. And they're like, well, what if it was that, but this a little bit? What if we twisted? And Louis was in a place, he didn't feel like doing it. So he was just like, oh, well, no, I'm not going to do it that way. So nice talking to you. And then FX would go, wait, hold on. What if we did it a little less like we suggested? And Louis was like, not less, not at all. We do it like I want to do, or I just won't do it. And that's sort of the place that these two guys were negotiating from.
Just like we thought, he summed it up by saying that, you know, the show tested well, and that's exactly how he said it. The show tested well. However, you know, if we could go back and somehow make it more clear that deep down, the kids really did have respect for their parents, that Al deep down really did care for his wife, that deep down the entire family did really care for each other, that we could potentially have something special, at work here. And that's when Ron uttered, and I total credit, uttered the famous line, and we would have every other effing sitcom in the history of television. And with that, we got up and walked out. Now, when we walked out that door, we were convinced that this show would never, ever see the light of day, because with all of the Fox executives in here, we basically said to you guys, shove this right now. Already, you guys, you haven't even been on the air yet, and you lied. So you're technically, congratulations, you are now an official network. Because right out of the box, you're lying to the people, to what's supposed to be your team. You're an official network now. Congratulations. See ya.
It is weird. Not weird. I suppose I understand it, but ultimately, all these like rebel type of outlets that start as like, hey guys, we can do something different over here. We could change the way television is made. Ultimately, they conform to what the other networks are doing. And that's why Fox is indistinguishable now from the other network. You're not like, oh my God, look at what Fox is doing. It's so much different than CBS. It's all the same shows. You know what I mean? Like Brooklyn Nine-Nine could have been on any network. It just happened to be on Fox. It's hard because all these networks become that eventually. And you kind of realize with a story like that, that's ultimately what they wanted to be. They just saw an opportunity to get themselves recognized for a brief time. And I think a lot of outlets do that, where they exploit unique and creative minds to use them to get eyeballs and then just conform to whatever you're doing. You kind of see it with YouTube now, where forever YouTube was an outlet where you could do whatever you wanted. And now because they want rights to football games and stuff like that, you have a hard time getting monetized if you curse or you use certain language or give certain opinions. So like that's what Fox was at its infancy, and these guys sniffed it out pretty quickly. But what they weren't aware of, according to them, when they said that, when Ron Levitz said you'll be every other fucking sitcom, they weren't aware that like they needed to get this on air. So it was just Fox assuming that these two guys who haven't been, showrunners before or anything would just bow down to the network, and they took that gamble and they lost. The working title for Married with Children was Not the Cosbys. So it shows you what they were literally looking for, something the opposite of what the Cosbys were.
Yeah.
And yet they said like, hey, let's make it at the end of every episode, everyone learns a lesson. And, to Ron Levitt's credit, he was like, well, that's every show. And I would even say to Fox, like, well, get a show that does that and put it on Thursdays, up against Cosby or whatever. Like, do it however the hell you want to do. But let this show be something that was wholly unique. And luckily they did do that, obviously.
Next, you have Katie Seagal talking about satire.
Yeah, so this is kind of what I was talking about before, where Katie Seagal has a pretty decent perspective on it, but this is definitely something that actors struggle with when they play sort of a ridiculous character.
Did you think that the show was misogynist at the time? Because it's my memory, and I could be wrong. I could just try to look back on the show in a positive way because I watched it when I was a kid. That it was All in the Family style, sort of satirizing this exploitative culture that we had developed in the 80s.
Well, that was completely what it was. However, people's interpretation of that. I cannot tell you how many people would call or write and say, my family is just like that. That's exactly how my mom is. That's exactly how my dad is. And so
the guys in Jersey that worship Tony Soprano not getting
yeah. So, suddenly it dawned on us that, this is not just a satire to everybody. Some people are really, truly relating to this. And that's when I would get these very serious questions about a show that was really only meant to be funny. It was meant to be funny and to entertain and to laugh at ourselves. And I always got it as that. But some people took it really seriously.
And that interview, earlier in that interview, she said, that guy asks her, was this a misogynist show? And she goes, oh, totally. But but it was meant to be funny.
Right.
And that quote got taken as Katie Seagal turns her back on, she hated Married with Children. She hated being a part of it. And as you can tell by your tone there, that's not what she was saying at all. She totally understood the show. Now, what happens to a lot of people is Al Bundy, for example, is a loser. If you cut to the core of that character, he's a guy that's still 20, 25, 30 years after high school is talking about a game where he scored 4 touchdowns. He is the ultimate loser. His family doesn't respect him, all that stuff. So that is a ridiculous character, but that guy exists out there. There are losers. So there are going to be losers that go, hey, I relate to what Al Bundy is going through. I'm kind of seeing this from his perspective. I hate that no one respects me at my job and my kids talk down to me and my wife won't have sex with me, or I'm sick of having sex with my wife. There are people like that. So to assume that no one's going to relate to it and everyone's going to be like, oh, this is ridiculous parody. It's silly in a country of 350 million people,
Yeah. But next we're
going to take things however they want. You can't really control that.
No, everyone needs to lighten up. What it comes down to. But we have advertiser protests.
Well, speaking of lightening up, this is a great moment. This is what should have been happening for the last 10 years. When people talk about cancel culture and hey, there are consequences to people's act. There's freedom of speech, but there are consequences. This is what the consequence should have been, and how it shows how companies mishandled. I think a lot of what happened in the 2010s for a majority of it. But this is, I believe, 1991, 90 maybe. So the show had been on the air for about 3 years, and a housewife in the Midwest stumbled upon it.
I feel very strong vibrations here.
Did you leave your toy running under the couch again?
It exploits women. It has anti-family attitudes. It stereotypes poor people. It's just a very offensive program.
Terry's one-woman letter-writing campaign succeeded in getting advertisers like McDonald's to pull spots from Married with Children, but her initial success has turned to disappointment. The show's ratings increased dramatically following all the publicity, and if the show itself changed at all, it probably slid even further into the realm of bad taste.
So Terry Ricolta, I believe is her name, literally a Bob Murchison type.
I was just going to say,
the parallels are almost exact, where it was one woman who had a lot of free time. I believe her family was very well off. I heard David Faustino refer to her as a millionaire. He said millionaire or billionaire. He said she had a ton of money. So this was just a bored housewife who stumbled upon the show, and they make a vibrator joke, which for 1990, that's very edgy. You certainly weren't. It was not the Cosby Show. You were not seeing that in a lot of other places. So Terry Ricolta saw a joke she didn't like. I actually don't. I'm forgetting now. I don't think that was the specific joke she took issue with. I can't remember. But she starts cold calling these advertisers and complaining, and she got a couple big kills. She got McDonald's, Coca-Cola, a few others. Now, Fox could have panicked in that moment and said, "We'll do whatever you want. The show's canceled. McDonald's, please come back." Fox knew, hey, for the first time ever, this show is getting publicity, and it's written about in the New York Times and all this stuff. So this is getting massive ratings, and all of a sudden, people that have never heard of Married with Children are like, "I got to check this show out. It seems pretty off the wall." It doesn't seem like anything I've seen on television before. Let me find Fox now for the first time. So Terry Ricolta, I saw clips of her on like, she was on like a call-in show, and she kind of made a joke because someone called in and said, Terry, I'm with you, but it seems that Married with Children's ratings have gone up since you've done this. So could you say they won? And she said, yeah, they should send me a fruit basket or something, some joke like that. And apparently the producers every year after that, the show was on the air, would send her a fruit basket, like a thank you basket, thanking Terry Ricolta for their ratings. Because like I said, the show had been on for 3 years and most of the country hadn't heard about it until Terry Ricolta. So it worked beautifully. And that Anthony Jeselnik talked about this in his recent special where he says to comics that talk about cancel culture, hey, be better at your job. Like that's going to happen. To an extent, I agree with that. Like what you should expect as a comedian, if you're pushing boundaries, is public backlash. Like you're going to come across the radar of some people who are upset by you, who complain to the comedy club you're at, who call the network you're on, whatever. What the network should do is say, we hired them for this reason. We're going to expect phone calls from people that are outraged. As long as it's literally not, Ed O'Neill's not screaming the N-word without our consent. Like, we're going to kind of let them do what they want. These scripts are run by corporate and everything. Like, everyone's aware of the show that's going on the air. We signed off on all of this. So for networks to kind of abandon that and take no responsibility is shitty. And that's what you saw happening, 2015, 2016 and beyond. But in the 90s, they said, oh, what a great opportunity this is. As I recall, Janet Jackson kind of changed all of that, where TV networks started getting much more worried about something making air that was going to offend people. But before that, it seems like, at least Fox, because they were newer, they had the right attitude about it.
Next, we have Behind the Scenes.
So this is a little snippet I found of from an interview with David Faustino, where he talks about the mentality, the atmosphere offset on Married with Children, and it was a wild world. Like they really did embrace some of the chaos that was seen on the show.
David Faustino, who played Bud Bundy, offered some revealing details about the people who were writing the show. Speaking with Hip Hop DX, Faustino said writers Ron Levitt and Michael Moye, quote, were two of the biggest horn dogs of all time. He added, they had porn stars on the show. Terry Weigel, she would come through all the time and she would be flashing everybody. Faustino recalled an instance where Weigel put his head underneath her top, exposing the then 15-year-old to her bare chest. Although he laughed off the experience as fulfilling his teen fantasy, he later admitted that it was a wildly inappropriate act.
Yeah, pretty weird. So I guess like shit, there were constantly porn stars on set and shit like that. By the way, I will acknowledge, I guess it is Moye. That's two people that call him Moye, so I'll start doing it, I suppose. But yeah, there's that type of atmosphere going on in the 90s, and that's the opposite of what we're talking about, where it's like the Me Too movement and all that stuff was good for that, where it's like you have children on set. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Like that is pretty crazy. So it's funny to me, like Terry Ricolta isn't worried about that. She's worried about someone hearing a vibrator joke or something, like that's what's strange to me, is like worry about things that are really happening, not the jokes that come across on the air, but hey, it was a different time. Who am I to point fingers?
Now we have them talking about the period episode.
Yeah. So there are a couple lost episodes in the history of Married with Children. So we'll hear Richard Gurman talk a little bit about it, and I'll explain it more after we hear this.
They might be, and you might also be surprised that the first couple of seasons were directed by a woman almost exclusively, Linda Day.
Yeah.
Some of it is, I think that the women had a strong voice in the room, and I do think fans would be surprised to know that. And in fact, one of the shows that had the biggest controversy, the period show, which ends up being aired as the camping show, where they go camping and the three women end up having their period at the same time, and they get locked in the cabin, and animals come and surround them, and so on. That was written by two women, Vosberg and Sprung. Yes, I think people will be surprised. And some of it is self-selected. It's people who would want to work on that show, and that is probably part of it. But there was a very strong women's voices in the room, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, there were a lot of there was a heavy female presence on Married with Children, which is kind of funny when you hear like a story like we just played, or like I said earlier about Christina Applegate. It's funny, like women were contributing to that. I think it was just a more laid back atmosphere. Like they weren't as uptight about some of that stuff. But so the period episode, for a little more context, is Michael Moyer saw an article about women syncing up their periods. And that was something that hadn't really been talked about before. It wasn't as common knowledge. Now you hear that terminology a lot, but it wasn't common knowledge back then. So Michael said it would be funny if we made an episode where they take a camping trip and Peg, Kelly, and Marcy are all trapped in this house together with the guys, and their periods line up. That is a premise that has been ripped off, not ripped off, but like redone so many times now on sitcoms. They even did it on Modern Family, Ed O'Neill's other big show. So like that's been redone to death. But at the time, again, it was so taboo. It was so not talked about that people freaked the fuck out. And this was, I'm trying to think which one of these, it was either that episode or the next episode we're going to talk about. One of these lost episodes. It was right after the Terry Ricolta thing. So I think they kind of conceded on that one of like, okay, we won't air that, I guess. But I think that speaks to what Married with Children was doing, because now if you did that, it would be hack. It would be like, oh God, they're making this joke. But at the time, they were like opening doors that didn't exist before. Like they were making fun of things that before you couldn't talk about. And when people get sensitive to that stuff, my response is always like, making fun of it is the best way to break the ice on that subject. Mm-hmm. Where like it's so much more uncomfortable if you aired a serious documentary about women's periods syncing up. Who would watch that? What dialogue is that starting where women are comfortable going, oh yeah, this is what we go through, blah blah blah. Whereas if you make a joke about it, it's like, oh really, is that true? And conversation is started. So I always think humor is the best way to go, which is why I think shows like Married with Children are so pivotal in in history, really, where like you're allowing subjects to be talked about in a way they weren't before. I think the next clip is the next Lost episode, right?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Let's hear that.
It's about us going to a motel, one of those sort of blue motels, and we see our neighbors on the video screen. That's hysterical. It's very funny. I don't know why they're so upset.
Who is they?
I guess, that's the word they give me all the time is they. So I guess it's those guys in the suits, they keep sort of passing it around. They won't let us, So we've given them that little concession. We won't show it.
Katie Seagal, who's now like kind of synonymous with comedy. She's big, in Futurama forever. She was on another sitcom with John Ritter. But at the time, she was in a band. She didn't even really want to act. Her father was in showbiz. He was a director, I believe. But she was like into music, and a manager found her as she tells the story and just like suggested going on auditions and stuff. So she started doing that as sort of like supplemental income, but her passion was music. And she even says to Joan Rivers in that interview, she's like, I'm not a comedian. I just read the lines. Like I just happen to be good at delivering the lines they write. So like for someone like that, it is impressive the attitude she had with such a controversial show. Like she was able to get it very easily, it seems like. But I think that's so crucial because what she's talking about, if it doesn't fully make sense, the episode is about a sex tape that is shot in a seedy motel. And it's funny because now that wouldn't be a blip on the radar. If you heard some CBS sitcom did that now, you wouldn't even, no one would give a fuck. So it is funny to think like that's what I think a lot of this does. And we talked about like with Norman Lear, he had to fight against the word pregnancy not being used on it. They wouldn't allow the word pregnancy to be used, never mind discussed. And Norman Lear had to fight against that. And like these are the barriers that those things break down. And by the networks allowing them to some extent, obviously you're hearing concessions where these episodes didn't make it to air, but a lot of it did. And I think that's crucial to allow those to get out to audiences. Now, luckily, we live in a time where you can just make your own stuff. And I think Hollywood is starting to realize that finally, that they kind of have to let people be creative, otherwise they'll die. So we'll see how that culminates over the next few years. But back in the 90s, it was definitely pushing the envelope, as they say.
You know what's funny is she's Katie Seagal's married to the guy who created Sons of Anarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And I've watched the show, and I remember there was like sometimes it was like music interludes, and I'm like, that just sounds like Katie Seagal's voice.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
and it was her.
Yeah, and it was her current music.
Yeah, she talked about how that bothered her, where she would go into. She might have been talking about Stern specifically, because I listened to an interview with her and Stern, and she's like, you go into these radio stations for an hour, and they spend 5 minutes talking about your music, and the rest of it is talking about Married with Children. So that's something I had to deal with. But it seems like she ultimately had a pretty good attitude about it. I didn't know that was used in Sons of Anarchy, though. That's good.
Yeah,
which she is also in.
Yeah, her singing voice is just her voice. Like
that's weird in a show that she's in, because you're like, is that the character?
That's what I'm saying. I'm like, listen, why is
yeah.
It was really her. Next we have Amanda versus Ed.
So this is the one like beef on set I could find, because it seems that the four main actors, Katie Seagal, Christina Applegate, David Faustino, and Ed O'Neill, are all friendly to this day and like each other very much. There was one on-set beef. So Amanda Bearse played Marcy, the next door neighbor, Al Bundy's rival, the sort of feminist voice on the show. And her and Ed O'Neill did not get along all too well. So there are a couple catalysts for this, supposedly. One being that the only two people that weren't invited, Amanda is a lesbian, and the only two people that weren't invited to her wedding, gay weddings were very unheard of at the time, in the 90s. So Amanda Bearse was getting married. The only two people in the cast and crew that were not invited were Ed O'Neill and David Faustino. And Amanda Bearse, Ed O'Neill confronted her on this. He's like, hey, what the hell? Like, that's kind of a shitty thing. And she said, well, it was a tough decision. I just thought you two would laugh seeing two women walk down the aisle in tuxedos. And Ed O'Neill, he said that his response goes, why would I laugh at that? And then started laughing as he was talking about it. And she goes, see, you would laugh. And he goes, because it's funny. And so there was that. And there were other instances. Amanda Bearse started doing a lot of the directing in the later seasons. So she was taking on more responsibility. So she was in most episodes, but here comes a side character that now has actual responsibility and has a bigger voice on set. And so Ed O'Neill, the star, has to deal with that. And I believe this is a clip of him putting her in her place.
Another time we got in a big fight over something stupid in the makeup room. And she said something about you're a bully or something. And I said, well, you're miserable. It was just bad in front of everybody, by the way. And then I said, you're not very bright. It's your problem. And she was bright. But I said, but in a way she wasn't, because I said, look,
you can't give her that.
No. Right. And I could just see her gearing up like, I'm smarter than you. And I said, no, because I'll tell you why, because I have a button I can push. That button says get rid of Amanda Burse. You don't have a button that says get rid of Ed O'Neill. Your button doesn't work. Mine works. Now, this was a mean thing to say. I never was going to push that button, but it was true. I could go to them and say, look, I can't work with her. I go where she goes. Who goes? She goes.
I like Ed O'Neill. He might come off as kind of a dick in that story, but I like that he's like, listen, I was being an asshole, but it was true, you know?
She deserved it.
Yeah, so I'm a big Ed O'Neill guy, but even in his telling of the story, I can understand how he comes off as a dick. Amanda Burse hinted at, and there were rumors of this forever, and Amanda Burse's interpretation of it confirmed it to a lot of people. They said in the later years, Ed O'Neill kind of became a dick on set and wanted more money than everyone else, and they believe that part of the reason the show ended was Ed O'Neill's high, salary demands and stuff like that. So there is some speculation that Ed O'Neill wasn't necessarily the best guy to work with at the end. However, like all the other cast members, not just on this show, but on Modern Family, have nothing but glowing things to say about Ed O'Neill. So it might just be a situation where two personalities, and you hear Ed O'Neill's stance there. And like I said, the joke about the women in the tuxedos, like you get his vibe, and you get a 90s feminist who felt like she kind of had to be that voice on the show, now getting more responsibility as a director. It's easy to see those two personalities clashing, particularly when one of them is the star of the show. So, but yeah, there was definitely tension there on set. But other than that, it seems like everyone got along.
I can't blame him at all. Like, if you see two women walking down an aisle in tuxedos, it's not funny.
It's funny.
It's not. But when someone's like, you might laugh. Why? Because there'll be two women walking down the aisle in tuxedos. When you say it like that, it's pretty funny.
I think that Craig lulled me into being the bigot in this story. I'm like, it's funny. And Craig's like, oh, no. There's nothing funny about that.
There's nothing funny about that.
No, of course. You're right.
All right, next we got typecast.
So this is kind of how the entire cast felt. I just used a clip of Ed O'Neill, but you can kind of find all of them saying something to this extent, and I think it is the right mentality. There's a lot of stories about guys, particularly guys on sitcoms that had catchphrases like a J.J. Walker or something, becoming very bitter. I think Dustin Diamond was like that as well, where it's like you get recognized for this one role and it kind of becomes the bane of your existence. Like you hate anyone that mentions it. You hate being associated with it because it's all you ever hear about. And that was something Ed O'Neill had to work through.
I was conscious of the fact that I didn't want to be typecast like everybody, and I didn't want to. And and it used to be irritating to me wherever I went when somebody would come up to me and say, "Yeah,
Jesus,"
and it used to irritate me. And it got to a point where I started to get not nice about it. I mean, I didn't yell. I mean, I would just say, "Hey, pal, that's not my name," And that didn't take long for me to hear me say that. And I thought, what is wrong with you? They don't know you. They only know you from the show.
Right.
Shut up. You made a lot of money. You're a lucky son of a bitch.
It's a hell of a run.
It's better than any, construction work or whatever I was going to do with my life, steel mills. And so I got out of that.
Yeah.
And I really got out of it to where I would say, yeah, how you doing, pal? You know, and I'm okay with that now.
Yeah.
It's such an admirable attitude. It's funny. I think even David Faustino, who is the one member of the cast, like Katie Seagal, Christina Applegate, and Ed O'Neill, have all had various levels of success. Katie Seagal might be the most successful of the three, but they've all been in a ton of stuff after the show. Christina Applegate obviously had a great career. Ed O'Neill was in another long-running hit sitcom, which is crazy.
A bigger one.
Probably, a bigger one. So that's pretty nuts. But David Faustino is the one guy who was typecast, who never really found another role. He said he's made good money in like voiceover work now and stuff, but acting after that, he was just seen as Bud Bundy. And even he has kind of the right perspective on it. I don't know if you blame, like network executives or the public, probably a combination of both for this. But I've never understood how dumb you'd have to be. Like, I've seen Jason Alexander in things other than Seinfeld. And my reaction is but George wouldn't say that.
Right.
Like, I don't get how fucking stupid you have to be to not be able to comprehend that actor is in a different thing. I don't get it. It actually plagued Henry Winkler for years. And it wasn't until like he just looked older that he could play other roles finally. So I've never really understood that. By the way, I forgot to mention this at the beginning. Speaking of Al Bundy and getting typecast, you know who else auditioned for the role of Al Bundy? Is Michael Richards.
Oh.
So I think that would have been a very different character. I don't picture that at all.
He slides down the stairs on the banister.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Richards is a very good actor, so I'm sure he could have done something with it. But I don't see him as the Al Bundy that we know and love necessarily. But yeah, that would have it could have killed two great sitcoms if Michael Richards gets that role. Butterfly Effect. Maybe Seinfeld never would have been as good, and Married with Children never would have been as good. So thank God everyone got the roles they did.
Wasn't Chris Rock going for Kramer?
I think Chris Rock was going to be George.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, no, that would have been bad. The whole Butterfly Effect, take it down.
Chris Rock as Kramer, we wouldn't have had a lot of problems we had later,
No, that would it would have all worked out.
Yeah.
We got a last clip here. Cancellation of the show.
Yeah, so before we get there, so season 7 is marred by the character 7. Where they added a child. It's one of the places that the classic trope of adding a character late in the run, adding a child late in the run, is kind of a jump the shark moment. So the kid was named 7. A kid from another family that the Bundys take in, I guess. And it was a weird moment because they add this child to the cast, and then they kind of made plot lines around like removing the child. Like, it was such a raunchy show, and like I said, it was a roast, that having a kid in a lot of those scenes didn't make any sense. So it was very closed-minded thinking where they're like, well, that'll get people talking if we add a kid to the show. And then pretty quickly they were like, we don't want this kid. So I guess the writers even did do, sort of fun stuff. Like, I think like in season 8 or something, they basically got rid of the character and never acknowledged it. And they would have like little references. Like, I guess if you look closely, 7 is on a milk carton as a missing child in one of the episodes.
Oh, really?
Which is pretty funny. So they did kind of acknowledge that they fucked up with that. They also had a season where Peg Bundy is pregnant, and that's because Katie Seagal was pregnant in real life, and she had a miscarriage in real life. And so they wrote in the show, they wrote it as it was all an Al Bundy dream sequence, which is like kind of a funny way to handle that. That has to be wild for Katie Seagal to have to deal with that.
God,
That has to be crushing to not like the kid also doesn't exist on the show. That's crazy.
Terrible.
But yeah, so and then in season 7, season 8, 9, 10, you have Michael Moye leaving the show to work on other projects. You have Ron Levitt leaving the show to work on Unhappily Ever After, I believe is the show, which I guess this is how hack fucking television is. The WB network that was launching years after the Fox network launched said, you know what we got to do is exactly what Fox did and make Married with Children. Let's literally hire Ron Levitt to make that show. And it didn't work the same, but it is why Ron Levitt left Married with Children. And eventually that's just what happens on sitcoms where Michael Moye talked about where like they're in the writer's room and he's just getting frustrated because he's like, didn't we do this like 5 years ago? Like they just ran out of ideas and that's what happens. I didn't realize Married with Children, it was like 250 50 some odd episodes.
That's
I didn't
great.
realize it had that long run. It was 11 seasons because they aired in the spring of 87. So 11 seasons, but 10 years, 10 calendar years it was on the air. And I didn't realize they had that many episodes. I don't know why it doesn't have, well, I guess I do know why. I'm about to answer my own question. It doesn't have the syndication run that obviously like Seinfeld and Friends or even like Frasier has. Everybody Loves Raymond, King of Queens. You see those a lot more. I guess it's because of the raunchy nature of the show that they probably think it doesn't play as well at 3 p.m. on TBS, you know? So I suppose I understand that, but it is like Roseanne is on, like you see Roseanne on a lot more, and they're just as, tackle as many hot button issues, if not more, than Married with Children did. So I'm surprised it didn't have the syndication run, particularly with the amount of episodes that it had. But another reason for its abrupt cancellation, according to Ed O'Neill, was the high price. I guess it was like $1 million an episode for a lot of these affiliates to purchase the syndication rights, where I don't know enough about the industry to know how high that is, but I guess other shows were much cheaper. So Married with Children kind of priced themselves out of being rerun a lot, which is why you don't hear it in the zeitgeist as much as other shows. But it really was, like I said, it was massively influential. I think maybe some of those later seasons hurt its legacy, probably, because it did have that jump the shark moment and people got sick of it. And even I didn't realize it was early on in the show because I heard Richard Gurman talk about it being another jump the shark moment. Like people point to Al Bundy falling off the roof and then walking in the house to have an argument as a like a jump the shark moment. That was in season 4. So that was fairly early on that they really started to suspend disbelief a little bit. But obviously a historic run. There was also talk of different spin-offs, particularly No Ma'am, which is an organization. Let me see if I got this right. I believe it's National Organization of Men Against Amazonian. Wait a minute. Amazonian Motherhood? No, it can't be that. I can't remember what the last M stands for, but it's the Organization Against Women. It's an Al Bundy created organization. Michael Moye wanted to make a spin-off show where those guys actually try and solve men's problems. And the way he describes it is that the network was so horrified by his pitch.
National Organization of Men Against Amazonian Masterhood.
Masterhood. Yeah, that makes more sense. So the network was so repulsed by his suggestion that would be a show, that these toxic men, and this is back in 1997 or whatever, these toxic men would go around and try and solve men's problems. And that's when Michael Moye said, like, I think I'm just out of this business. It's passed me by. I was the edgy guy 10 years ago, and now I'm the old man that doesn't fit into this world anymore. So he tipped his hat and walked away, and that was the end of Married with Children. Like I said, a lot of the main creators and writers had left the show by 1997. So that is why you get this, where Ed O'Neill talks about the cancellation on Ellen here.
See, when Married with Children was canceled, it was canceled in between seasons. So we were all off doing our own thing. In fact, I found out, I was back in my hometown in Youngstown, Ohio, coming out of a bed and breakfast. Beautiful spring day. Car pulls in, just married, with the thing just married and the cans hanging off the back. Bride gets out in the bridal dress. The guy's in the tux, and they go, "Oh my God, Married with Children." And I said, "Oh, hi, you just got married, wonderful." And they said, "Oh, we love your show. We're so sorry about it, though."
They told.
What do you mean you're sorry about it? Well, he doesn't know. It's all over the radio. It was canceled. We're sorry. I said, "I'd rather hear it from you."
That's hilarious.
So I took him in, got him a bottle of champagne. That's how that went down.
Wow.
It seems like kind of a bullshit Hollywood story. Christina Applegate told essentially the same story on Jimmy Kimmel, where she was out with friends and they were like, "Sorry to hear about your show. We heard it on Kevin and Bean." And she's like, "What are you talking about?" So and I guess Ed O'Neill goes on to say that the network called him like 6 weeks later, which is crazy. He knew for 6 weeks before they called him. And they go, this one got away from us. We forgot to tell you, which is just wild disrespect for their flagship, the show that launched the network. It's just spitting in their face completely. But yeah, that's how they handled it, I guess. There's been talk of reboots, which makes sense because all the actors are all still alive, and I know Christina Applegate was in poor health, but I think for the most part they're doing okay. So there's always been talk of some kind of reboot in this era of reboots, and I guess there was talk of a cartoon. I heard David Faustino talking about that. David Faustino seems a little bitter. I guess Ron Levitt's son, Mark Levitt, has the rights to all of that. I don't know exactly how it worked, but I guess he inherited that in some form or fashion. And he has put the kibosh. Anytime a reboot is mentioned, he puts the kibosh. Artistically, I respect that a lot more. I think opportunity and income-wise, David Faustino's pretty pissed about it.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't want to get into it, but some guy keeps, harshing our buzz with these reboots. I think it's probably the smart move. You don't want to see these characters old, particularly Kelly Bundy. What are they going to cheer when Christina Applegate hobbles in with a cane now? You know what I mean? It would be sad to see that. So I think it's probably the right move. But try as he might, David Faustino's working on an animated reboot or something. They're trying to get it done, but I don't think it's going to happen. I don't know if there's a call for it in this day and age. But yeah, I did this episode because I wanted to shout out Married with Children because I don't think it gets the respect it deserves for kind of ushering in that era of comedy. Because, after Married with Children, things get progressively more harsh. You start to have Howard Stern, and then you have Tom Green and Jackass, and all this stuff in entertainment becomes raunchier and raunchier until ultimately, we started swinging back the other way a little bit. But they definitely were a big part of the culture in the 90s, for sure.
If you want to support the show, go to Hulu or Disney Plus, and you can stream it right now.
It's pretty weird, but yeah, go do that.
Hey, more eyeballs, the bigger chance of a reboot.
Craig working for Mark Levitt? What the hell's going on here?
No, I'm working against him.
Yeah, go do that, I guess. Go watch on Hulu. Did you say Hulu or Disney?
Yeah, it was really weird combo.
That's bizarre.
Yeah.
But I know Disney owns Hulu, but it's still weird. Anyways, yeah, shout out to Married with Children. And, another show that's ahead of its time is the Blind Mike Project and Why Are You Laughing? So support those before it's too late. Yeah. Go to blindmike.net. Don't let the networks shut us down. And support those programs on Patreon, become a YouTube member, or just support the show for free wherever you get podcasts. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to like, subscribe, comment. I've gotten a lot more lately. I guess I get more and more as the show goes on. But this week in particular, someone was like, hey, do an Andy Kaufman episode. Another guy was like, hey, do a Tom Green episode. We've done all these. So I say go back to the archives and see what you've missed, because we've done 160 episodes at this point. So go through the back catalog, listen or watch Why Are You Laughing, catch up. Make sure you haven't missed an episode, because we've gotten into a lot of different topics that you might not realize we've talked about. So support the show. Blindmike.net is where you can find all those links. We appreciate it. Very good show. Keeping up the tradition of misogyny that Married with Children brought into the world.
That's right.
So go to verygoodshow.org and support that program. Although I always hear the website's not working. True or false?
It's working perfectly fine. I don't know why people are still saying that.
Okay. Well, guys, test it out. Go to verygoodshow.org. See if it works, or see if Craig is lying. And support the good boys over there as well. And we will talk to you guys next time on Why Are You Laughing?
Zip it up and zip it out.